back to Enjoy Parenting. I'm going to start by confessing to feeling a little bit frenzied at the moment because I just said goodbye to my eldest daughter, Lana, going back up to college, and I only got to see her for 5 minutes for the first time since she was proposed to and accepted on Sunday. So that is a very substantial milestone in the life of a mama.
Yeah. Well, that's some parenting that you can enjoy.
That's some parenting I can enjoy. And I remember one of the themes of a previous episode being to expect the unexpected and build in buffers for things that throw you off your game. So
yeah,
I might be a little thrown off my game right now, but so I thought I would start with a question that someone had sent a couple of weeks ago that we didn't have a chance to get to, which conveniently addressed a topic that's been on my mind. So we're killing the what's on my mind category and questions from listeners. You can kill two birds with one stone.
Okay.
So the question is, how to develop a strong desire in children to become independent when they grow up. He says, though I'm well past raising children, I'm often astonished at younger acquaintances whose children can't move forward and seem to have so little ambition. Others, however, excel and move quickly to independence. Would like to know what dynamics cause one or the other outcome. Now, I know you have thoughts on this, and I'm really eager to hear those. And I think people are going to get tired of me saying this is far too substantial a topic to be covered briefly here. That's just the reality of the sorts of abstract questions we're going to get, as we could go a million different directions on them.
Yeah.
So because this question fit in with something I've really been thinking a lot about recently, I thought I'd just focus on that aspect of it, the part that's been on my mind, with apologies to the questioner, because I'm conscious, number one, that I'm probably not directly answering your question, and number two, probably not being fair to the spirit of the question, because I'm just kind of using your question as a jumping off point for something I've been thinking about. So I just want to confess that, acknowledge that from the start. So the thing I've been thinking about is a concept I want to introduce into our vocabulary, if it ends up having a place. And that is the concept of cargo cult parenting, or cargo cult education. We could apply it. You can apply it in every realm, but since those tend to be the topics we focus on, those are the ones I want to mention for right now. So I know you know the concept of a cargo cult, but I'll just share it briefly in case there's anyone who hasn't heard of this idea before. I was introduced to it by Richard Feynman, who in his autobiography, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, talks about the cargo cult, who were these primitive islanders in Melanesia who saw colonial officials bring in deliveries of really valuable cargo by airplane and wanted to recreate this windfall of wealth that came to them. So what they did is imitate what they observed that brought this windfall. So they made imitation runways with fires on the sides, or built a hut for someone to sit in with wooden headphones and bamboo antennas. And then they waited for the planes to land because they thought they could just sort of ritualistically follow what they observed and achieve the outcome that they had seen achieved before.
Yeah, it's like an airport done in the style of a rain dance.
Yeah. So this concept of a cargo cult can now be used to indicate anyone who engages in imitative rituals to bring about a certain result. So the thing I've been thinking about in relation to the question that I started with is that a lot of people I know, educators, parents, place a premium on making their children independent, on this question of developing independence in them. And I think there are a lot of reasons why that's a focus. Part of it is that objectivists are inherently going to focus on the value of independence as a character virtue that they want to inculcate in their children. I think culturally, this is a common theme right now, that kids are graduating from college and still not able to fend for, care for themselves. So there's a lot of reasons why independence gets the focus. But one thing I've observed, and this is the very limited take I want to focus on in regard to the question right now, is that by setting independence as a goal, by making that a primary, the outcome of independence in child rearing, I think it causes people to engage in this sort of cargo cult approach to education or to parenting, where what they might do is try to ritualistically have children mimic adult behavior, as opposed to really focusing on what does it take in a child's upbringing to help them develop to the point that when they go off on their own, they feel like capable, knowledgeable, informed, self-sufficient individuals. So just kind of reifying this concept of independence and imitating it, as opposed to being really conscientious about what does it actually take to become a mature human being, and becoming a mature and full human being is what is going to allow you to be independent. Probably would be good to concretize.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Is there an example of the kind of imitative behavior that you're thinking of?
Well, the first one that comes to mind for me is the number of high schools these days that create an office space, like an industrial complex kind of environment, because they are sort of imitating the outcome they want. They want kids to be comfortable in the industrial technological world, and so they just create that as their high school experience. That's one that comes to mind. Even just simply the concept of letting a child do something for himself or herself, that there's often a premium placed on, well, I need to make sure I let my child do this on their own so that I'm not, cultivating dependence. And so one question I've been asking myself in regard to this is it even in order to help them become independent, is it deeply important to just recognize their dependence for a long time? That's the most radical way of putting it, to treat them like dependents for a long time to help them become independent. So it's a big topic, but I just wanted to put it on the table.
Yeah, well, so I've got a couple of thoughts in response to that. But when you were talking about this cargo cult parenting, maybe a more vivid example that occurred to me was the worship of entrepreneurship for parents. That's a really popular buzzword right now. We want kids to be like entrepreneurs because those are the people that we admire. And so we kind of foist them into situations where they are given a business to manage, like go out there, set up a lemonade stand. I don't want to, Dad. No, go set up a lemonade stand and be an entrepreneur. That's a caricature, of course, but a lot of that entrepreneurship stuff, it's not something that is emerging in any sort of natural or organic way. It's not something that is the next hierarchical step of their pursuit of values as they start a venture and they need to practice entrepreneurship. It's more this cargo cult style of parenting where I want the outcome of entrepreneurship in my child. I will now put them into entrepreneurial situations, and step 3, they'll be entrepreneurs. There's no step 2. It's just step 1, put them in entrepreneurial situation. Step 3, they're entrepreneurs. So there, I don't know if does that seem to fit in with what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, now the bigger principle that you're referring to, that you have to recognize the dependence of the child at first. You have to, this is something that has been in my mind for a very, very long time, that children start their life ignorant and incompetent. I'm sorry, with all apologies to babies, they're ignorant and incompetent. And it's a slow process where they gain more knowledge and they become more dependent. And the thing that guides you through from that newborn to adult is the concept that made you famous, hierarchy.
Mhm.
That you have to look at, well, what is a reasonable test of their independence at this point in their life? What should I have them do on their own right now versus what should I do by myself? But if you just have this cargo cult mentality of, I want independence, in every situation, I will figure out where can I insert more independence. Things are going to end up going wrong.
Mhm.
And I could tie this into the thing that's been on my mind with Isaac, but I want to pause because I'm kind of going on a tear here. I want to see what your thoughts are at this
No,
point.
that's all very much in line with what I've been thinking about. And I don't have definite conclusions in my mind of where those lines are. I
Mhm.
can say that in regard to facilitating your child doing something for themselves, I don't really go through life with that as an omnipresent issue in my mind. I just don't.
Mhm.
There are things that I do for them. There are things I let them do for themselves, but I don't have this commandment in my mind that I must make sure at all times that if they're developmentally ready, I'm allowing them to do something for themselves. And I think I have observed times that having that as an omnipresent issue in your mind puts a lot of pressure, a lot of unnecessary pressure on you as a parent, and also uh, is somewhat arbitrary as a commandment. So, for example, I was talking. This is potential blasphemy, but it's what I've been thinking through. So I'm just going to mention it. So there's the idea in a Montessori classroom, for example, that the tissue boxes should be at child height so that if a child needs a tissue, they can go get it themselves. And this is part of a general principle of empowering them to be able to function independently in their environment. And what occurred to me is, yeah, that's great and cute and fine, and I would certainly approve of having that as a classroom element. But I don't feel like if I don't do that or any other particular set of reducing things to child scale, that they are somehow not going to be accessing things themselves or reaching things on their own, feeling a sense of competency and accomplishment. If I was just talking to my husband about this, and he was reminding me that when our youngest was around 2, she would find some little treasure everywhere we went. She just seemed so attuned to what was on the ground and in her environment. She would always be collecting like a sequin or a bead or a rock, and that is just as satisfying, empowering to her as being able to access the tissue box. So that's where, if we're not careful, I feel like it can become ritualistic and it can become arbitrary to say we need to make these things accessible for them in these particular experiences um,
Yeah.
within their reach. Otherwise, they're not going to be cultivating
Yeah.
that sense of independence.
So I think that the way that we need to, it's all about the way that there's a truth to it, that having things that children can do on their own that are hierarchically appropriate is beneficial to the child. There's truth to that. But it's the way that it's framed that really becomes important, that it's not as though if the tissue box is up here, they're hurt and they've lost something and they won't become independent. It's that tissue box experiences where there are things that are hierarchically appropriate that they're able to do, so long as they have that in their life, they're going to get it's like a nutrient that they need, and they're going to get enough of it. It's not as though every time they don't have that, they become less of what they could be. So it's, but we're dabbling with blasphemy here, but there is a certain perspective that you and I have sometimes witnessed in a certain variety of education, where where the independence gets elevated up too high, and where everything that is not done independently, anything that wherever dependence appears in the classroom must be squashed out, and that there can be no experience of dependence where the child needs the adult for one thing or another.
Or at the very least, that the burden of proof is on the thing that you're doing that they depend on, where it's guilty until proven innocent for you to do something for them, as opposed to allowing them autonomy and choice in the matter.
It's so it's interesting because there's been two things that have been on my mind that are going to connect into this. Is it okay if I segue that
Yeah,
in?
absolutely.
So I reread a passage of John Locke's second treatise recently because
Mhm.
that's something that I do. And it's I studied political theory in school, and I did my thesis on John Locke, and I really love his second treatise. And there's just one little paragraph where he talks about parental power. And I was realizing just how much that little paragraph has impacted me as a teacher and now as a parent.
Mm.
And he's talking about it in the realm of political rights, and with that specifically, not parenting per se, but he says that parents have a power, a natural in his theory of natural rights, parents have a power over children because they do not yet possess reason, and it's the possession of reason that gives them these
Mhm.
rights.
Mhm.
And then he says, that as they grow older and as they gain more understanding of reason or the laws of the land that govern them, the powers of the rightful power of the parent diminished. And
Mhm.
so it's just a cute little paragraph where he's trying to explain within the framework of individual rights what gives a parent the right to tell a child what to do.
Mhm.
And he identifies the principle very, very clearly that parents are in possession of reason and children don't have a fully developed capacity for reason. And to the extent that they're developing that, the power of the parents diminish. But when they don't have that, the parents have a lot of power over them. And so it's funny that that seems to fit in really well into this theory that you're talking about, that
Yeah.
we need to recognize how dependent children are when they're very young.
Mhm.
And honestly, if we force them into independent situations prematurely, that can actually hamper things down the line.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's just kind of been on my mind. That I imagine kind of an XY axis with two trend lines, like the power of the parent is going down over the time, and the
Yeah.
competency of the parent goes up over time.
The
And
child. Yeah.
or yeah, of the child. And your job as a parent is to kind of ride those two waves, and
Mhm.
to do that successfully, you're going to need you need to watch the child carefully to figure out what's hierarchically appropriate to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just a summation of some really broad principles rather shortly.
Yeah.
Um,
Great.
so another thing though that's interesting is I had this experience with Isaac this week that I think fits into what you're saying, that um, so we went to a park with a friend, a couple that we're friends with, and they have a child that's just a couple weeks older than Isaac. And it was the first time that he's just really had like a play date. He's been around other kids before, he's seen other kids at the park, but this was the first time that the two of them would just, like, they did this adorable thing where they found a wooden stump, and one would put a stick on it and say right there, and the other one would put a stick on top and go right there, and then they would go back and forth stacking up sticks until they'd fall over. And it was a wonderful example of two things. Like, it was peer-to-peer interaction, which is something that you and I have been like not skeptical of, but inspecting more closely recently.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was spontaneous activity. It was not organized by the parent.
Mhm.
And aside from just we put them in proximity to each other.
Mhm.
And it was just beautiful. It was magical. But I think it fits in with this recognizing the dependence of the child and the importance of the parents, because it was only really possible because Isaac was using phrases that he had learned from us. Like, he
Mhm.
was doing games that he had done with us, and he was interacting with this boy the way that he had
Mhm.
interacted with me and my wife.
Mhm.
And so this spontaneous independent experience, it was really, really enriching for him, and
Yeah.
he learned and gained a lot from it. Was something that occurred as a result. It flowed from parental interactions. So that's at least the way that it's fitting in my mind. I don't know, how does that fit in with the ideas you're thinking about attachment and peer relations and all of that?
Yeah. So just for people who may not have heard our previous discussions, you and I have been reading the book Hold On to Your Kids, which is raising all these questions about the raising the idea that being very strongly attached to the parents is deeply important for the overall psychological well-being and success of the child. And it's one of those almost gestalt shifting perspectives. I think we're going to have to really try that on for a while and then reconcile it with our own experiences and ideas. But it has brought a lot of examples to my mind, reflecting on my own experiences with my kids, where I feel like the fact that I am their touch point for a lot of things is what enables them to thrive in situations removed from me. Still continuing to be that force is what allows them to navigate their way through a lot of different situations. And so it's definitely something I'm focused on observing in my interactions with them.
Yeah. So that's half of the idea that we're playing around with, that
Mm-hmm.
we need to recognize the critical role of parents as kind of a moral compass point for children and a way to guide them through tough situations. And the other half of the book is looking skeptically at just how much we have kids dependent on peer relations instead,
Yeah.
how much they are just having unsupervised time with kids for most of the day. They spend more time unsupervised with children than they do with meaningful parent relationships or adult relationships. And so we haven't gotten through the book yet, but I'm looking at the so far in the book, it just seems like every time children are together is guilty till proven innocent. That's the point of the argument that I've gotten to so far.
Yeah.
But then I'm looking at Isaac playing with his friend, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong with this. This is great. This is rich and robust. And so, not that I would think that there's anything wrong with it, but I'm just trying to square those two experiences with each other.
I get the sense that it's when a threshold is crossed and the balance tips. So they're so immersed in their peer world. And I don't think that's by sheer amount of time or anything like that, but they lose contact with adults they trust and respect as a fundamental. Their orientation shifts to their peers, and then the peers with their fluctuating world and unreliable attachment and lack of wisdom and real ability to guide them, that's when it becomes a hazard, when that balance shifts and the peers become the focus for their sense of self-worth or the guidance they seek or that sort of thing. So what I've been doing is reflecting on what I think helps preserve the child's attachment to the parent and not have that balance shift in favor of peers. So, play dates and going to the park doesn't even come into mind as something worthy of questioning. What does is, for me, immediately, is amount of time spent connected on the iPad, by texting, by gaming, by all these different, that maintains a total connection throughout the child's home experience as well as at school, or a school environment in which they lose direct connection to the adults in their environment. That was my experience going to school. There was a teacher at the front of the room who would deliver lessons to us, but the world of school felt very much like it was just me and my peers. I didn't go to teachers with difficulties I didn't feel observed by my teachers, partly because the classes were so enormous that you have this anonymity in the classroom. It wasn't a world where adults were really present in a meaningful way outside of the lessons they were delivering at the head of the class.
Yeah. They weren't there for any of the spaces in between lessons. Like they weren't there for arrival, dismissal, passing in the halls, recess, lunch. They were in no way a presence in any of those spaces. And then even in the classroom, you didn't feel truly seen by the adults in the way that you are making a relationship with them that matters to you. The only relationships that matter to you are with your friends.
So those seem like the big hazards to me, is a school environment where they lose contact with adults who are good guides for them, and a home environment where they can maintain those peer connections to the neglect of a really meaningful connection with their parents.
Yeah. Now, we only have a little bit of time left, and maybe we should try to more earnestly answer the question that prompted this
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
discussion. So is it that they're wondering what is it that makes, what factors contribute to a child being independent as they grow older? Is that the thrust of it? Yeah.
Yes, and what you as a child rearer can do to cultivate the things that allow for that.
Yeah. So my first thoughts on that is we need to be careful about what we mean by independent, because we're in an objectivist sphere here that we're talking about, and objectivism as a moral principle is really much more epistemological. It's about how do you arrive at what you think is knowledge, and how do you make decisions. And it's I'm not a great ethicist here, but I'm just trying to make a distinction between independence as an ethical principle and independence as a character style. And I think that we conflate those two really easily. That, well, I want my child to be independent as a character style. Like I want them to be like, I don't know, some sort of cowboy in High Noon that can face off a gang by themselves or something. Or I want them to, be entrepreneurial where they're pursuing all kinds of things on that. That's not really what's meant as an ethical goal. And if it's just that you want to control what character your child has, whether or not they are take the initiative and they're independent, or whether they're a bit more quiet and reserved, I think that's kind of a fool's game to try to get into that too much.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and going back to your Locke quote, independence understood that way, our goal is to really develop their capacity to reason.
Yeah.
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 And I think that's
a big topic than we have for 3 minutes. Yeah.
It is, but just making the differentiation between developing their capacity to reason versus helping them to develop a brash and confident personality where they feel prepared to go off and do things on their own
and make a stand all the time. Yeah. That I wouldn't make that a goal for myself as a parent. That instead what I'm going to do is just try to make sure that they have a good nurturing environment, and then see what happens to some extent, or have a little bit of that attitude baked into my expectations. Well,
one thing that might be good for a later conversation is to address the part of the question that asks, what are the dynamics that cause one or the other outcome, and maybe reflect on cultural trends that might be leading kids to graduate from college with this sort of dependence.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot that's been said by other people on that too. There's a lot of new trends, especially around technology and ease of communication with people that can solve your problems and all that kinds of stuff. But that might be a bigger topic than we can fit in right now.
Yeah. Any last thoughts?
I don't have any last thoughts on this question of independence that can fit in right here. But just that this is a little bit of an example of something that we were talking about before, of results-oriented parenting, where you kind of think, what do I want from the child down the line, and work backwards from that. And I think that's something that you and I build much more is we just want to make sure that we have a good environment, that this like good soil that the seeds are in, but we don't really know what's going to grow from those seeds. So it's just a perspective shift in that, that it's a perfectly fine question to bring up just as a topic of intellectual discussion. But if that's really the way that you're framing parenting, like, I want my child to be Steve Jobs, or I want my child to be this or that or the other thing, and working backwards from there, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble as a parent.
Yeah.
Well, should we go over to this to Clubhouse now?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.